Hello everyone, and welcome to our session, an Agile and DevOps overview. I'm Elizabeth Woodward, and I'm going to be discussing with you a bit about Agile and the trends that we're seeing with Agile, and we're going to discuss that as well in the context of IBM's approach to DevOps today. I do have about, I would say a 45 to 50 minute presentation, and I'd like to save some time at the end so that we can have some additional discussion. Before we start though, I would like to very much thank Faris and the other members who are working so hard to build the Bosnia Agile community. It really is an honor, a deep honor for me to be here with you today. I have to say that I would much rather be there in person, but I do believe that this gives us a chance to make an important point in a way. There is just so much value to be gained in connecting and learning from others. That really is the heart of agility. It's this notion of continuous improvement and that we're going to work together to be the best that we can possibly be. And there is just so much richness of connection that you get face to face that you obviously don't get through other methods. I love seeing local communities thrive for that very reason. At the same time, it's important that we connect globally, that we don't let distance or geography or other boundaries of that sort keep us from being able to connect and learn from each other, from sharing what works and what doesn't work and sharing our experiences. And so I do want to thank all of you, each one of you, for making that effort to connect today. There are several ways that you can reach me after this session. I'm available on LinkedIn, Twitter, and I'm also lizofaustin@gmail.com, and that's where I'm presenting from today, Austin, Texas. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so quickly the agenda. We are going to discuss the big picture of Agile. We are going to touch on the evolution that we're seeing in Agile methods as they relate to trends and to enterprise agility. So we'll share with you some of the things that we're seeing and where we see agility moving. And then we're also going to discuss how this ties to IBM's approach to DevOps. You may be thinking DevOps, development and IT operations, and that's the extent of it. But there's more to IBM's approach, and so I will be sharing that with you, and this is quite a bit to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. So when we talk about Agile today, the context is quite a bit different than when we spoke about agility more than a decade ago, when the Agile Manifesto was first conceived and signed. We see that teams and organizations and enterprises are really maturing in their understanding of what Agile is and in their efforts to be more Agile. With that increasing maturity, there is a shift in focus to breaking down barriers to agility throughout the organization. The Agile Maturity Report that IBM co-sponsored with the Scrum Alliance indicated that 81% of teams have more than 1 year of experience with Agile, or at least believe they do. 81%. And 25% would rate themselves as extremely knowledgeable about Agile. So today, 2014, Agile is pervasive. So beyond experience levels, though, Agile has been around long enough that we're seeing standards emerging in places that might not initially be considered as places where Agile would thrive. In January of 2013, the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instruments, AAMI, approved Technical Information Report, TIR 45. This is guidance in the use of Agile practices in the development of medical device software to its list of approved standards. Now that is a U.S. standard, but I think it gives you a pretty good indication of how Agile is maturing. This guidance, what it does is it aligns Agile with a standard that specifies lifecycle requirements for the development of medical software and software within medical devices, embedded software. The guidance covers everything from documentation to evolutionary design and architecture, traceability, verification and validation, managing changes, and even what done criteria might be. So this is, the medical device space is a highly regulated space, and here we are in 2014 with Agile guidance for it. Also, there's emerging guidance for Agile in government activities. Many people can't even believe that Agile and government would be in the same sentence, yet here it is. And it depends on what country, what activities are happening. But in the United States, I can give you a couple of examples. Many of the entities rely very, very heavily on IT today to support their missions. And in the U.S. in 2011, we spent $76 billion. Our government spent $76 billion on IT. That was 2011. But there are so many examples that we have in the United States of cost overruns and schedule delays and quality issues and problems that contribute very little to the mission-related outcomes that the organizations are trying to undertake. So what we did in June of 2012, IBM worked with the U.S. Government Accountability Office to identify, one, effective practices in applying Agile for software development solutions, and two, to identify federal challenges. What is making the use and implementation of Agile development techniques so challenging in government? So we worked with the federal government to have those discussions and develop some guidelines. We've also seen similar activities, though, in the United Kingdom, in the UK. Their National Audit Office now recommends the use of Agile as being the best way for building software products in government departments, and they provide guidance for adopting Agile and for governance of Agile projects. There was also a hearing in the UK of a Committee of Public Accounts. This was back in May of 2011 as well. And it became clear in that meeting that they don't just see Agile methods as useful for developing software. They see it as an effective technique for successful information and communications technology-enabled business change. So there are broader implications beyond just software or just getting software out the door. And again, here, the point is that we're seeing Agile emerge. Agile has emerged in some places that previously would have been considered quite unlikely. So I make this point about the maturing of Agile because as enterprises mature, we see a shift in focus. As an example, we will see a team have success within a larger organization or enterprise. And as that team has success, this change sparks curiosity. This change sparks other change in other teams. And so we'll start to see multiple teams begin to coordinate. We may see a manager who takes great interest in how one team is having particular success, and they want to inspire or ignite that with their other teams. So there becomes an effort to manage more at a program level where you have multiple teams that are coordinating. Of course, that's for a larger project. The next thing that we'll see is as those teams are coordinating and they're having success at a program level, we'll see that executives start to look at how can they manage their overall portfolio in a way that allows them to be more agile. So in that way, teams will begin to coordinate at a team within the team, and then at a program level or project level, and then beyond that into portfolio. And we've actually seen this spread beyond just programs to the other parts of the organization. So, we do see that the best approaches for transformation include a combination of bottom-up, where teams are passionate about what they're doing, they're sharing information, they're learning from each other, and they're self-organizing, right? Those kinds of concepts. But at the same time, having great executive support, having people at that level or position within an organization remove impediments and help you to make significant structural changes in how teams are organized, or teams changes in compensation. Having that support from executives, top down plus bottom up, tends to be we see one of the best approaches. But in either case, there is this progression of agility throughout the organization. And so we do see this impact beyond development teams to other parts of the organization and across the enterprise and into supply chain as well. So when we start looking at agility beyond software development and software delivery programs, we see that agility impacts and tends to transform many roles beyond those initial software development team and the core stakeholders involved with the software delivery side of things. Over time we see that product management and marketing and sales and services and supply chain and other parts of the organization that contribute to delivery of a solution are in a way peer pressured and sometimes executive pressured as well to embrace agile methods as well. If you think about it, I can share a couple of examples with you. So I was part of IBM's corporate-wide agile transformation, and I was part of the core team, and you can read about the approach that we took with this in Mike Cohn's book, Succeeding with Agile. But we very much took a community-focused approach to enablement, helping teams to learn from each other and to share their experiences. And as a corporate headquarters team, my role was not to force Agile upon everybody in a thou shalt do this sort of a way. What it was to enable, to help people learn from each other, remove impediments. And right away, back in 2006, when we began our IBM corporate-wide transformation, we ran into challenges with our business processes and our investment controls. These business processes, this governance process, was not intended to define how technical people develop software, but over time it evolved to that. So here we had business processes that required each gate was essentially a waterfall gate. So we moved from requirements to design, and then there's development, and then there's testing, and on. And so, that certainly created some challenges for teams that were trying to be more agile. They're filling out paperwork that requires that they've defined all of the requirements up front. So how are we going to deal with that? And so quickly that affected many other business parts of the organization. We also immediately, right off the bat, we saw that our IP protection processes, our inventing processes, took longer than an agile release would take. So if it takes several months to protect your IP and yet you're delivering to your customers within a month, there's a rather large discrepancy in there. And so we had to work with our legal department, we had to work with the attorneys to revamp our processes. And in both of those two cases, I list those because in many enterprises, working with large-scale customers as well as IBM, we see that those are two incredibly difficult areas. And in both cases, it's typically not that within a week you're going to completely revamp those processes and now everybody's agile. It just doesn't work that way. Typically, it takes multiple revisions and change and improvement over time to make that shift to really where you'd like for those processes, those non-software development processes and practices to be. So these are just a couple of examples of the spread of agility within the context of the enterprise. Now, I do want to talk about supply chain because I think that's where things really get interesting. So we've talked about the spread of agility from a team to multiple teams to a program or project to the enterprise level and beyond. We've talked about the spread across roles, moving from focusing on agility or agile development, where we have all of the skills together to develop and to deliver software to everybody else who's impacted so that we can deliver a solution. So that's our marketing and sales and services and support and so on. We've talked about IP, we've talked about legal, we've talked about governance. So we see this spread as Agile matures within an organization. And that's true. But there's also a spread to supply chain that we see happening. If we talk about supply chain in the context of DevOps, we often talk about software supply chain. So we talk about things like, are we hiring contractors? Are we, offshoring software? Are we, working with, other companies, or are multiple companies coordinating? We talk about that, software supply chain. What we talk less about is this bigger picture of supply chain, and those are a couple of stories that I want to share with you from the work that I did on the IBM Research Global Technology Outlook a couple of years ago. That work is currently actually alive and thriving in projects within IBM today, and I want to share with you the core, what it is that we see here with supply chain. I have an example of a broader view of agility from the retail space that I think it really does stress this shift in agility and why IBM has formulated the DevOps approach to Agile. We had a retailer who was not only interested in being able to continuously adapt their web presence and their web application. They, of course, as a retailer, they wanted to be as responsive as possible to their evolving customers' needs and interests. And also, if they had a business partner, if somebody comes in with a new product or a new idea, they need to be able to capitalize on this very quickly. So they were interested in not only being able to change the website very quickly, but they also wanted to be able to completely adapt their entire end-to-end supply chain within a 24-hour period. That takes agility to a whole new level. So now if a customer or a business partner identifies a new opportunity, imagine this, in less than 24 hours, they expect to not only be able to update the web application and make these changes. In this case, that may actually be the easy part, because they also expect to make changes to their shipping processes, complementary marketing efforts, manufacturers' orders, and on and on. Everything in the supply chain that it takes to fulfill this new business model and processes. That is the shift that we're seeing in agility. We're no longer just talking about how do I develop, although we still have challenges in that area and we're still learning, no doubt. We're still continuously improving in that space. But we're seeing this broader picture, and a door is opened to supply chain agility. So we've talked as well about Agile appearing in these really challenging places. We talked about two specific ones, medical and government. Okay, so now I want to share with you a second example of extending agility all the way through supply chain, and I want to do this looking in that complex space. Let's look at smarter product development, where we're not just, again, developing software for a web application or for a mainframe or for a mobile device, but now let's talk about developing software for maybe a jet plane. And that's exactly what I want to share with you. Because I spoke with an aerospace contractor last year, not for this particular aircraft that you're seeing on the screen, but it was really interesting to hear how their organization is approaching agility. The gentleman I spoke with mentioned that in the more distant past, what would happen would be that they would work all the way through requirements and design and development. Now, mind you, again, this is aircraft development. This is not agile in the way that we think of it. This is, embedded. They use a V model, but they are trying to become more agile. And so what they saw was that they would develop requirements, they would work through design, and at some point they would begin engaging manufacturers who would create the equipment and set up the machines to create parts of the aircraft. And what they often found was that the manufacturer coming in at the end would say, if you were to just change this a little bit, if your design were a bit different, if the way you had chosen to implement this were a bit different, it would be far less costly for you. Or, worse than that, it would be, we can't machine that. We cannot do that for you. So let's get in and talk about the changes that are required to actually make that happen. Well, he quickly saw, that approach, as we know from software, that's probably not going to work very well, but there are, obviously here hardware constraints. But what they did was they brought in those manufacturers. Now they're bringing them in earlier. They're bringing them into the requirements and the design stages early in the process so that they won't have that extensive rework in the end. So here's a case where an aerospace contractor is bringing supply chain manufacturing into requirements and design activities. They don't match typically what we think of as agile, but I would say that they are most definitely increasing their agility. So again, we're getting into supply chain, looking at this bigger picture of agility, and it's along those lines of the trends that we've been seeing over the last few years. So there is this greater pressure on organizations to be more lean and agile in order to compete. We have to be as lean and agile as we can possibly be, because if we are not, our competitors will be. We have to accelerate innovation. We have to accelerate software delivery. We have to be able to balance speed and cost and quality and risk. And we also have to reduce time to customer feedback. It's an imperative, because if we are not able to, again, our competitors will, and we'll be out of business. So that is the world we live in today. And I show the picture of this gentleman putting his sweater up over his head, because this can be daunting, and it can be quite scary. You may think you're safe in a place like aerospace or aircraft development, and even that is being impacted. So how are we getting there? How are we going to get there? Well, at the same time that the enterprise view of agility is changing, our agile methods are also changing. Scrum is still the leading agile project management framework. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but with Scrum, we have an ordered, dynamic product backlog of everything that might be needed in the product. Every sprint, We have a consistent time box of less than a month and typically 2 or 4 weeks. And we take the highest priority work off of the product backlog and we agree to a sprint goal. We have a cross-functional team that includes all of the skills required to get the job done. We participate in daily scrums every day within 15 minutes. We discuss what we have done since the last meeting to achieve the sprint goal, what we're going to do today to help meet the sprint goal, and we discuss impediments blocking us from achieving the sprint goal. And at the end of the sprint, we have a sprint review where we discuss what's been done or not, and we conduct a demo. We don't display a PowerPoint presentation of what we wish we had done or what we might have done. We demonstrate what we have done, and we discuss and revise the product backlog. And we also conduct a sprint retrospective where we discuss how we can improve. This gets back to that continuous improvement discussion. And the result of the sprint is an increment that is done. It's in usable condition whether or not we decide to ship or not. And there's more to it than that, but that's my version in under a minute. So how do we know that this is the leading framework? Well, a few ways. The IBM Agile Maturity Report, again, that we conducted with the Scrum Alliance and even version 1's annual Agile survey, they both indicate that Scrum is most commonly used. But there's another interesting way to look at this. If you look at the screen, you'll notice a graph in the upper left. This is a graph created with Google Trends, and what they do is they analyze a percentage of Google web searches to determine how many searches have been done for the teams you've entered compared to the total number of Google searches done during that time. So what I'm looking at here is Google Trends. And Google Trends also, it gives us a way of viewing a world map. It's really cool. You should try this sometime. You can see over time where searches are happening and what percentage of the overall searches come from what locations. So this gives us a chance. We can see this progression of interest over time. And we can see the lighter areas are lower percentages, darker or higher percentages. And we can see this progression over time as searches are executed from more and more countries. So if you'll look at this, you can see this massively global adoption of Scrum. The original, in the early days, you'll see that it's primarily focused on the U.S. You'll see it in the Americas, and then you'll see it spread globally, it's quite cool to be able to see that. I'd also, just keep this in mind because we'll discuss this again in a couple of slides, I'd like to point out that Kanban is more recent, but has continued to increase over the last few years as well. And you'll see why this is relevant in just another minute. So again, Scrum is very, very popular. It's the most popular development method. And now I want to look at agility in the enterprise, and let's start considering that there's more to enterprise, more to the enterprise and to solution delivery than just development teams cycling through Scrum. Let's talk about this other picture. We see that there are a couple of options that have become very popular. And the first of these is disciplined agile delivery. Disciplined agile delivery has its roots at IBM, and it's now maintained by the Disciplined Agile Consortium. What it does is it extends Scrum's construction life cycle. If you think about the essentials of Scrum is focused on software delivery, Disciplined Agile delivery starts to look at the enterprise as a whole. And there are several interesting aspects to this life cycle that I want to share with you. First of all, notice that it is iteration or sprint based. So you can see this familiar iteration in daily Scrum or coordination meeting cycle, this kind of a figure 8. It also shows input from outside the delivery cycle. So something occurs before the project, before inception, and we see from the diagram that Agile teams often get new requirements in the form of change requests and defect reports coming in from production. These inputs from the broader enterprise provide important context for the overall delivery cycle. The third thing I want to point out is that there is a work item list and not a product backlog. Disciplined Agile Delivery, or DAD, has a greater scope than Scrum, and when you take this greater scope into account, you begin to realize that you need more robust change management, something more robust than what we typically see with Scrum's product backlog. Work items include requirements, defects, and other non-functionality oriented work, things like training, vacations, assisting other teams. All of this work needs to be prioritized somehow. And so with DAD, we bring this into the process. The fourth thing is that it includes explicit milestones. Along the bottom of the life cycle diagram, there's an indication of suggested lightweight milestones that address internal or external governance requirements. Here's where we start talking about what might Agile look like, or how can we succeed with Agile when we may be subjected to governance requirements, either internal ones, as I discussed earlier, this business gating process, or requirements and governance because you're working in the medical field or you're in aerospace and there are certain regulations and inspections that have to take place. Now I wanted to share this diagram with you as well because it depicts a continuous delivery version of disciplined Agile delivery. This is basically a leaner version of the previous life cycle where the product is shipped into production and or to the marketplace on a very regular basis. This could be as often as daily, though weekly or monthly is also common. The Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe, that's another popular framework for enterprise agility that has evolved over time in response to successful teams and organizations' experiences with agility at scale. And I can say that because I was part of that, experienced it in the very early stages. We had teams of several hundred people that in the very early stages, as they were addressing problems like, each sub-team, each small Scrum team has a different sprint length. That seems to be causing some problems. We could be more effective if we were on the same sprint length. We could be more effective if we aligned our sprint boundaries. Those kinds of things. As we saw teams address challenges and try to become more agile, we saw that they evolved into the approach that you see here with SAFe. And again, there really is no contradiction, I don't believe, between SAFe and disciplined Agile delivery, as I'll discuss in a minute. But we did see, SAFe as an evolution within the enterprise. This framework, the SAFe framework, it addresses agility at the team, program, and portfolio level within the enterprise. And, although you can't see the Scrum figure 8 in this diagram, if you look down at the bottom, you can see that teams work in iterations and they do use Scrum at the team level. At the program level, we're focusing on features that feed into the team backlogs, and at the portfolio level, SAFe uses Kanban, and that's to manage this continuous flow of business and architectural epics that are coming in. So if you look at this, an Agile release train is to a program, combined teams working together, a value stream, as a sprint is to a team. So that's kind of the relationship there. Again, within our organization, we have seen quite nicely that in many cases where you have large teams that are trying to coordinate, that this is what we see teams, successful teams, evolve into. If it's not safe, it's something that looks very much like safe. Now let's go back to our view of Google Trends. We can see that safe is gaining awareness. And the more interesting news, I think, is that right now the focus is primarily in the US. That's where you're getting most of your searches coming in from. But we also have seen interest growing in Europe. And I'm aware of teams in Japan, Brazil, and other locations that are also embracing and asking questions and becoming certified and learning more and implementing SAFe. So, if you look at how SAFe is likely to trend globally, if we think of that as likely being along similar trends to what we saw with Scrum, it's very likely that we're going to see momentum continuing to grow around SAFe for quite some time. So in general, in looking at disciplined agile delivery and SAFe, DAD serves as a robust agile process decision framework. Every step of the way, every aspect, there are options and pros and cons, and you can get a sense of what has worked for other people and what hasn't and why, and you get pointers to additional information and practices that can help you. That's fabulous. And based on the experiences with IBM and enterprise clients, as teams are continuously improving and making choices, quite often they're going to evolve into something that either is safe or looks very much like safe. If they are very large teams within that enterprise looking to coordinate and work together as efficiently and effectively as possible. But we've discussed diversity within the enterprise. There are many teams and many different characteristics of teams, and so it is important to understand that what the impact is on teams that are like yours, and you make your own decisions from there. Again, we're getting back to self-organizing and giving teams an opportunity to learn and grow. These are complementary approaches. I see them as complementary approaches. And if we think in OO terms, I think to some degree it's reasonable to say that SAFe is an instance where DAD is the class. Both methods are continuing to evolve, and I think that they will both experience great success for quite some time. So I would also like to say that IBM is a member of the Disciplined Agile Consortium, so we continue to contribute and work to help that content, and we're also a Scaled Agile Gold partner. Our business partner, Blue Agility, offers services and a template for SAFe with Rational Team Concert. Celegi has a solution that enhances prioritization of features, and SDE offers a solution that helps organizations select and evaluate recommended practices, including those implemented with safe and disciplined agile delivery. So, IBM is a supporter, again, of both disciplined agile delivery and scaled agile framework. Okay, so now we've talked about agile trends, and we have talked about where we see the trends headed in terms of enterprise agility, and we've talked about a couple of the frameworks that today they're evolving and they are helping enterprises to be more agile through the team, project or program, and portfolio levels. And we've also talked about this greater view of enterprise level awareness and agility. So now what we're going to do is we are going to look at IBM's approach to DevOps. Okay, so I am going to read you this definition because I think this is very important. We see DevOps as an enterprise capability for continuous software delivery that enables clients to seize market opportunities and reduce time to customer feedback. Again, this is an enterprise capability, and teams and organizations within any enterprise, as we just discussed, may have very different characteristics. Again, it's not unusual to have an enterprise where you have your small co-located team developing a greenfield web application with the most recent languages, and in another spot you have a team working on a solution that includes components for mainframe plus web delivered to a mobile device. And we have other organizations that are delivering hardware and software solutions. Again, so a lot of diversity. And yet, in these complex environments, we're working towards becoming high-performing teams, organizations, and enterprises. And we're looking at optimizing those larger value streams that we discussed earlier. So when we talk about DevOps, what we're talking about is lean and agile principles and practices being at the core. And with that, there are 4 general adoption paths or areas where we see organizations benefit significantly by focusing their continuous improvement efforts. All right, so now what we're going to do is talk about each of those 4 adoption paths. In the area of plan and measure, this is where we have our business planning practice. And what we do is we expect that we're going to use lean principles so that we can start small and identify the outcomes and everything that's needed to in a small scale, test the business vision and the value of that vision. This is going to allow us to do this, to adapt and to adjust continuously. And it also gives us a chance to measure actual progress and what customers really want, and then to shift direction based on that learning. So measurements and measuring our approach and measuring the impact, those are a big part of this. And of course, looking at Net Promoter Score, if you look at Steve Denning's work, that is quite an important and maybe the only measurement that really matters. Are we delivering value, and are we having the impact on our customers that we expect to have? The adoption path of develop and test, that consists of collaborative development and continuous testing practices. So let's start with collaborative development. Collaborative development, that enables collaboration, and it must enable collaboration not only between members of a development team, but also between the team, development, QA organizations, if you're in an environment where you have a separate QA organization, and the other teams that are part of delivering the solution. So we can't forget about services if we need to make sure that we have services teams engaged. Support, if we have support teams before that product or solution or component is delivered, we need to make sure that we have support in place to be able to address the needs of our customers and to keep them happy, and to bring that information back into the solution. So being able to enable collaboration across all of these teams is critical, and it's also very important that we enable collaboration with the broader ecosystem, with the broader supply chain. We spoke earlier about contractors and vendors in terms of software development and delivery. It may be that you're including broader parts of your supply chain in that more forward-looking view if you have a complex supply chain. So being able to enable that sort of collaboration, that is part of the collaborative development practice within DevOps. Collaborative development, it also includes support for polyglot programming and multi-platform development, elaboration of ideas. How do we communicate and collaborate, especially if we're working across distance or across teams or across experiences, and the creation of user stories, and so on, complete with cross-team change and life cycle management. In many environments, it is very important to be able to trace what's happening with a request or with an idea all the way through to completion. And we may think, well, maybe that's not very agile, but there are environments where regulations require that sort of stringency. So the other thing is continuous integration. Collaborative development includes the practice of continuous integration because we know that promoting frequent team integrations and automatic builds helps us to be successful. We can identify integration issues early, and the earlier we do that, the better, because they're easier to fix then, and it allows the project to show constant and demonstrable progress. So the continuous testing practices are a key part of the DevOps methodology. They're part of this collaborative development and testing path. They have a special focus because what we're trying to do and what we do is to reduce the cost of testing so that we can help development to better be able to balance quality and speed. And the more we're able to take advantage of virtualized services, the better we're able to eliminate testing bottlenecks. And if we're able to simplify the creation of virtualized environments, that opens up all kinds of doors. It means that our test environments can be more easily deployed. They can be shared across development. If we have different kinds of testing environments that we typically engage, they can be shared across that. They can be shared, the same environment can be shared across with production as well. And if we're all leveraging the same environment, that is going to help to reduce the surprises that often happen when we shift from a development environment to a test environment and then over into our production environment or other. So these capabilities, what they do is they reduce the cost, and we want to focus on reducing the cost of provisioning and maintaining those test environments and shorten the test cycle times. So this allows, again, for us to do more testing, better testing, smarter testing, earlier and more frequently than we might be able to otherwise. The third path is the release and deploy path, and that consists of, as you may have guessed from our pattern, a release and deploy practice. It provides a continuous delivery pipeline. And that's important because we have automation of deployments to test and production environments. That reduces the amount of manual labor, and it also reduces the number of errors related to manual labor. It reduces the wait time, and when we start looking at wait time, we're looking at value stream mapping and lean ideas of reducing waste. And again, we're also eliminating rework that comes from or by having push-button deployments. What that does, if we look at this release and deployment practices, it gives us the opportunity to have a higher frequency of releases, reduced errors, and greater end-to-end transparency for compliance. It's very easy when somebody asks about the environment to be able to point to what created that environment, and you have your step-by-step documentation of that particular environment for compliance and for regulatory requirements. Okay, so that takes us to the fourth path. The fourth path is the monitor and optimize adoption path. That consists of monitoring and customer feedback and optimization practices. Now, please don't read this as, okay, we go through plan and measure, then we go through develop and test, and then we go through release and deploy, and now we're finally going to start engaging customers for feedback. That's absolutely not the case here. This is the adoption path. So this is how do we monitor and gain customer feedback, and how do we optimize throughout our solution delivery process. Now, what monitoring does is it looks at, enterprise class, easy to use reporting, because if it's not easy to use, people are not going to do that. And the purpose of that reporting is to serve as your information radiator so that everybody within the organization can understand where the team is at and how they're doing and how customers are reacting and where we're really at in terms of delivering value. So, this is, we can gain information, we can understand performance and availability, in process before this ever reaches production. And this early feedback through continuous monitoring, that's really important because it helps us to lower the cost of errors and change, and it also helps us to steer our projects towards successful completion. So, again, as we build, we're thinking about how are we going to monitor how people interact with our application, and how are we going to respond to that, how are we going to make the changes that will deliver those improvements and those innovations that our customers will really value. Now, one more thing that I'd like to share with you, about these adoption paths and about the DevOps point of view is that we are looking at complex enterprise scenarios where we do have teams that are agile and teams that are waterfall or V-model or using other methodologies, and perhaps that's because we're in the early stages of a transformation and not everybody is on board yet. Or it could be the case that you have teams that are collaborating and some of them will never be, or in the foreseeable future will not be agile for some pretty good reasons, or for what they feel are very good reasons right now. So to take a realistic view, if you have a mixed environment, we want to help the organization or the enterprise to be as agile as possible, but we also may be leaning more towards lean methods in that case. So there could be combinations, and so I raise that because if you look at the adoption paths, it is possible to improve testing, and it is possible to improve your customer interactions or other aspects without necessarily being agile, and that may be a huge step for a certain organization. So it's a little bit more realistic, I think, of a view when you have a very large number of people, and not all of them, you will not flip a switch and find all of them are agile at the same time. And this view, I think, of IBM's practice-based DevOps maturity model, this is the latest draft. I think you can see from that there are opportunities for continuous improvement in this that will apply very nicely for agile teams, and in other cases there are aspects that work well for more lean organizations. And I think that that's okay, because it gives us a chance to work with teams where they're at and to help them to improve in a way that's going to deliver the most value to them. So how do we pick and how do we choose how we're going to move forward with an adoption of DevOps or efforts to increase our enterprise-wide agility? So the first step that we have here is going to be looking at our current pain points in the delivery process as a whole. And I'll be honest with you, there are many times where a development team delivers beautifully, but if the rest of the organization can't keep up, we have to find where those bottlenecks and issues are and address the ones that are going to really make the biggest difference. And so that's what identifying key pain points is all about. It's not just, again, about focusing on what's happening with the software development piece. And then we look at assessing current capabilities. One size is not going to fit all, and not all organizations are going to aspire to the same level of capability in all of these different practice areas. But we do need to have a good sense of where we're at right now, and again, where are those places that could provide us with the greatest opportunity. And from that we can produce a heat map. We look at that heat map of what's going to give us the greatest impact, and then finally we can establish some sort of a roadmap, or if we don't want to look out that far, at least determine what it is we're going to be doing within the next sprint or so that we can improve together as an enterprise. So this is an example of one of our heat maps for an Agile initiative. So let's say you're in an enterprise, it's a mixed enterprise, but there are teams that are interested in becoming more agile. There are certain practices and capabilities that are going to be more valuable than others, and this heat map allows you to identify the relevant practice areas in the adoption paths and to emphasize them based on importance. Frameworks like Scrum and Kanban or SAFe, they provide an entry point into DevOps, but there may be many other additional focus areas targeted as teams continue to improve, and that's the gist of it. So we have talked about Agile trends. We have talked about where we see agility headed. We've talked about Scrum as the leading framework for Agile, and we have talked about Scrum as a foundation for disciplined Agile delivery and for scaled Agile framework. We have also talked about DevOps as a way of encouraging and enabling agility in very complex environments where you may be working with a combination of lean and agile, but you're working together to continuously improve in your ability to innovate and deliver value. I would like to say, though, that all of these, lean, agile, and DevOps, these transformation changes are culture changes. No framework alone is going to make you successful. All right, I want to thank you very, very much again for the opportunity to present. If you have any questions or comments or you'd like to get in touch, please do. I would love to have a chance to hear from you on a more interactive level. And I would also like to wish you all the best in your lean, agile, and DevOps journey. I'd also like to wish you the best with the rest of your conference. Enjoy. Please do enjoy the rest of the conference.